You're listening to NFT 365, the first daily podcast on NFTs with your host, Fanzo, talking crypto, blockchain, Web3, non-fungible tokens, metaverse, and...
What the f*** is a non-fungible token?
We'll get to that.
What's up, friends? Welcome back to another episode of NFT 365. If you're a creator or you want to hire creators or you're launching a project, you want to work with advisors, you want to rethink even this whole conversation around influencers and hosting, this is the episode for you. Excited to bring on my good friend as a guest, Shira Lazar. And so we're going to jump right into it, Shira, because for me, that's what it's all about. Excited to have you on the podcast finally.
Yes.
Shira, welcome. Woohoo.
Thanks for having me. I mean, you've been on my podcast so many times. It was only a matter of time. And I just love you and everything you're up to. So it is an honor.
Well, I was trying, we go way back. And for those that, we talk way back Web3, people are like, they think that's like a couple years. I was actually trying to find, I found a tweet that we were at, the South by Southwest. I think it was 2014 together, but I did actually find, let's see, I'm going to add it to this, see if it'll pop up here on the stream.
Wow.
I don't know if you remember this one. That's
oh
Live
my
Fronts.
God. Look,
So
my
we
hair
were-
looks really good.
We were on a panel there. I know. We were on a powerful little panel there at Live Fronts. That was 2017. But we've both have been in like the content creation, especially tech world. You're on one coast. I'm kind of on the other coast. But I've always looked. You have always done a great job of providing, hosting, amplifying, creating content, but also kind of being on that like same edge where I like to play, where we're trying to get, brands, businesses, audiences to do some innovative things. But you're also, a radio show. You've also had, massively long, YouTube and, oh, I just literally knocked my markers off my table.
What just happened?
That was pretty interesting, right? So yeah, this is all things are falling off. But I'm curious, as you look at where you are right now, how are you introducing yourself right now in Web3 as like, who is Shira Lazar?
Yeah, I appreciate it. That's always the big question because you need to spoon feed who you are to people for them to understand who you are. You can't assume or expect that they will have that title for you. You need to lean in. So I've always kind of set up who I am before people even understand, right? Because it's about what I want versus them validating or getting me in that way. And so in this space, as I dove in, I say I'm a Web3 advocate and collector, but also an advisor and a consultant in the space. I'm a broadcaster at heart. I've been covering social media trends and digital culture for almost 2 decades and started my own digital publisher, What's Trending, a decade ago. And now my work in Web3 is an evolution and an upgrade from that. And really my passion points are bridging the gap between Web 2 and Web 3 and, merging pop culture into that, making things understandable through content and education. And I really value equity and social impact as a through line for all of that. So that's like my long and short of it pitch.
I like it. I like where you went with that. And I mean, it's great. 2 decades doing that, and you don't look a day over 30. So I mean, you were very blessed in that realm. I'm curious for you when you look back, like when did you first like think of yourself as a creator, or like realize like, hey, this is more than like this is something I'm going to lean into? Because I mean, I remember when we first met in South by, like, and I think actually it's funny. I was thinking about this. The last time I got to ask you questions, I believe was the first time we ever met, which is kind of funny in that scheme, because I had Meerkat and I believe I was like a Dell collaboration event.
Oh,
And like,
yeah.
it was like awkward because they were making me interview all the like the influencers there as one of the influencers. I think that was literally the last time that we had on this side. But like, if you would have asked me in 2014, I would have not thought of myself as a creator. I just, for me, I was like a live streamer and a broadcaster. I was kind of
now I say broadcaster, because even in Web3 you say creator and they go, oh, so you're an NFT artist. And you're like, well, no, I create content around the space. So, it's funny because depending on who I'm talking to, I kind of lean into certain things versus other things. Like I didn't even include that I have a wellness company in there. Like mental
Yep.
health and wellness is really important to what I do too. And that becomes hard. Like sometimes I wish I could simplify it. At the same time, that would just be cutting out parts of myself. So I feel like Web3 lends itself to the multi-hyphenate. So it's perfect for the unicorns, all of us unicorns
Yes, I
who
could
want to
agree.
like do a bunch of things. That said, yeah, for a while, like for me, I was always the host and interviewer. And because I was interviewing creators, it was almost like I cut myself out of saying I'm a creator. And I think in doing that, I really did myself a disservice, right? Because it was like saying like, well, you're all creating the stuff. Like I'm not part of the ecosystem in a valuable way when that's not true. I think all of us lend value to the ecosystem in different ways, right? Wherever
Yep.
you're coming in from. Similarly, I did the same thing in calling myself a CEO and entrepreneur. Like I didn't say that.
Right.
I didn't lean into that. And so when I would get my badge for a conference, right, or have to fill out a form and they said like, what's your title? That's always been a hard thing. Now
The
I
worst.
say,
It's like the worst question of all time.
now
I
I
hate that
say,
question.
yeah, like creative entrepreneur and on-air personality, or I might write like founder and on-air personality. And yeah, a lot of people don't get it, but it's like at the same time, I'm like, if you don't get it, you don't get it. If you do, you do. Great. Like there's only so much I can do here.
Yeah, it's
I
like
just
it's the blessing and the curse of the multi-hyphenate side, right? The blessing of like we love to do lots of things. We can relate with just about anyone that's out there. The problem is getting others to talk about us with like a sense of like presenting all of that we offer is like, I mean, when I started calling myself I kept doing the same thing you were doing, and then I came up to like digital futurist, and it was actually my past speaker
oh,
agent.
that's smart.
Like I was like, that's great, but then all of a sudden people are like, well, we don't hire digital futurists, and I was like, oh crap, like there's no like stage for digital futurists. That's like they're like, I'm not a consultant, I'm not an advisor, I'm not a speaker, like, so like that is like I think for those in Web3, we probably struggle. There's more of us multi-hyphenates in Web3 than I think I remember even from early adoption days of Web2. And I think it is a blessing and a curse probably for many that are listening to this. They can agree, because when you just said when I asked you the first question, you were like, well, we have to own how we talk about who we are. And I'm like, oh yeah, I forgot we need to do that. Because like I was literally the guy a lot of times, like, I don't care how you intro me forever, however.
Totally. Well, that's just an easy way not to own. Yeah, like really put yourself out there.
Yep.
It's, you're finding the back door, right? Saying like, if you get it, great. If you don't, that's okay. And it's like, well, like, what if you just said who you are and it doesn't even matter if they get it or not? Because will be someone who does. And so I think like for me also, the whole thing of not calling myself a founder was huge,
Yep.
because I have at different points run a 7-figure business and yet wasn't being included in founder conversations. And as a woman, then wasn't being included in conversations possibly to invest in companies
Yep.
or get equity. And so you could see how it's like a domino effect to not being included and having an upside in many ways. And that isn't good. Like
Yeah, I
we
saw
need more of it.
I saw a tweet that you posted. It was probably a month and a half ago or so, and you were like, "Really wish I knew about that. I would have loved to invest." And I remember being like, "How the hell do
Yeah.
they not include you?" Right? Like that was like my thought. But it's because I know you at that level, right? Where there is an element of like, if we're not telling people the different ways they can work with us or own the different pieces, like that does put us in a weird spot. Because I mean, I'm like you. There's a lot of times where I'm like, "How was I not part of that?" Or why did they not think of me? And part of that is like, well, because they probably thought of us like in a different, light, in a different, vehicle.
There's two sides to it. That's true. And sometimes people just forget. People just don't think, and then you can't take it personally, right? Like,
It's true.
like we're not on top of everyone's minds, but how do you place yourself in a way so that in the future, like use that moment as information in terms of what you want to do? A lot of times we get butt hurt and then we just like go in the corner and we alienate ourselves or we get angry. For me, like after I feel that moment, I say, okay, well, what does that say about what I'm doing and how I'm doing it?
Yep.
And so, these social media bios are so perfect in a way because it forces us to really, in a concise way, claim who we are for everyone. And I'm always rejiggering
I'm updating mine all the
yeah,
time.
exactly.
Like
No,
all the
totally.
time.
For a long time, I didn't even say I was Emmy nominated. And I started seeing other people who've won Emmys or won awards or nominations. They say it in their bio. And I was like, oh, that's so cheesy. Like, that's weird. And someone said to me, no, you got to own that. And so I
Right.
changed it to Emmy nominated host, wellness and Web3. And I even added advisor investor because in the end, if I want to be investing more, people have to see that I'm saying that's what I'm doing. Right.
Yep.
And that's the reality. And it is worrisome because I feel like, and a lot of us do in Web2 who are creators, weren't part of the actual infrastructure. We were part of the ecosystem, but we didn't have the upside. We were basically helping those platforms get bigger. And
Yeah, let's
so,
face it. I mean, we
yeah,
were building on there so they could sell advertising to the people. And if we
totally.
weren't building on there, none of that would have been able to sell anything, and the investors wouldn't have got their return, right? It
And
was
yeah, and not the problem, but like this is the thing as a creator, like we're so into it. We're so into creating content. We want to bridge the gap. We want to put a spotlight on others that we tend to forget. And so my hope is that in the Web3 era that we get to have more of a piece of the pie. Once again, it can be challenging because there are so many distractions and because we're just trying to continue to plant our flag and push things forward. And then lo and behold, Proof Collective announces a raise, right?
yep.
And then Token Proof. These are all companies I talk to every single day. And yes, and Boss Beauties announces a raise. I'm a holder of even Moonbirds. And I go, well, I know I wouldn't be their lead investor, but I could be a strategic one. I could have put in maybe 5 to 25K or found
Right.
some support to do that. And I say to myself again, okay, information, how do we adjust the ship? So if we know that's where we want to go
Yep.
versus using that as a reason why we're not worthy and we suck.
Well, and that's such an interesting, because I think so much of it is like, we put in a lot, and actually this is a great framework because, I had Zeneca on the podcast about a week ago, and it was so interesting because he was like, yeah, I first created my first piece of content or a tweet that people mattered in November of last year. Like it hasn't even been a year.
It's
And
crazy.
I was like, could we go back to like when we first, like, so I was thinking about that, like from there are a lot of people that are listening right now that were not active on Twitter, up until Web3, right? We're not thinking about, an IG story or YouTube short or whatever that may be. And now they're having to lean into that. I mean, I think one of the things from my standpoint is like the relationships are important in that kind of category, but I think it's also important to own that, like the creator component of like what you create. Like I love you. I mean, you do a great job of, short and to the point on like news topics and things like I think like, unfortunately, there are a lot of people that have a massive following on TikTok that do the same type of content that suck at it, but for whatever reason, they hit like some kind of virality, right? And so I'm curious, like
Totally.
if you looked at like, like Zeneca's a good example, but like if you could go back, right, from when you were starting What's Trending and when you were starting, because like I looked at What's Trending, not Shira Lazar, right, which would be my feedback. I think you and I had talked about that before, because I was always like, man, What's Trending's popping off, and like I love what you're doing, but there was a little bit disconnect of like, is that Shira Lazar and What's Trending, or is it just
Want
What's
to know
Trending?
why? It's so weird. Everyone has an opinion about this.
Yep.
Either someone says to me, you know what? What's trending is Shira. And I wouldn't even know about it if it wasn't for Shira. And then other people go, oh, I didn't even know. I just thought you were an employee. I didn't even know you're a part of this, or I didn't know you're a founder. And so everyone has their opinion. And like at a certain point, you're just like, okay, what do you want to do with this?
Right.
But for me, the journey was because when What's Trending started, it was a show and I was the host. It was What's Trending with Shira Lazar. I had a vision of it being like a Huffington Post, right? Something bigger than me. And so with that, that's why it just became What's Trending. It wasn't with Shira Lazar. We have other hosts, we have other voices. It's not just about me, because like keeping up a What's Trending brand, if it was just me, it would be exhausting.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like I didn't want that. And like also it's like I wanted something bigger than me. Like I mean, some people might not want that, but that was something I felt like was more sustainable and lent to more of who I was and my mission in all of this. And so it was interesting because as What's Trending progressed, I felt actually too attached to it even after that.
Mm,
And when it was having, at its high, it was great. But then when there were lows, they were really low. And it was so attached to my identity and who I was that I felt like a failure when What's Trending was a failure. And so that really led me on a personal growth journey where I had to really separate myself from it and say, like, whether What's Trending succeeds or fails, I'm going to be okay. I know I'm good at what I do. And it's not going to be, the be all end all of that. It'll be an experience, that
yep.
I've had. And, some people even say to me, I'm in the Shira Lazar business, whether What's Trending comes and goes. So it's really strange, the perspective, depending on who you talk to. That said, that experience led me to hiring someone to really run it day to day so that I could then a few years ago kind of lean into some of the things that I had lost track of, like really my own voice.
Right.
I'd kind of lost my voice. I didn't really know who Shira Lazar was because I was just always covering news and trends and interviewing people. Who was I when I was being interviewed? Like, I don't even think people thought of possibly interviewing me because they were like, well, you're not the creator. You're not even the founder. Like, who are you?
Right.
And so that led me on that journey and to where I am today. And I feel like it led me to wellness and focusing on mental health, sharing my own journey on social media, being clear about the content that I wanted to produce. Like, do I produce that content on What's Trending or do I put it on my own personal platforms? Like, my own personal social platforms had kind of fallen by the wayside. And
Right.
so the past few years, it was really a focus on, and it could sound narcissistic, but like building the brand of me, like
Yeah.
building Shira again. Like, who am I and what do I want to represent? But that is so important because that should be the foundation, right?
Yep.
Your values, your views, your perspective should be the foundation of everything you do in your expression versus your company being the foundation.
Well,
Because
yeah, I
guess
think
what?
that's where
Yeah.
a lot of podcasters go completely wrong in
Yeah.
that they only do an interview show. They only ask the questions. They don't add their own perspective. And all of a sudden, 4 years in, massively successful podcasts, but no one has any idea what their view or opinion is on anything, right? And that is a really difficult component.
Yep.
And I'm curious, how are you, like, so from, there are NFT founders that have, great projects right now, but let's face it, the projects, most of them are less than a year old. Some of them are a year old. Like Asher, I'm thinking of Asher, the founder of Lazy Lions. I had him on the podcast, and he told me, like, I mean, I asked him for like months, and he was like, "I'm not doing podcasts. Like, that's not who I am. That's not my role." And eventually, his community just like kept knocking on the door, being like, "Dude, you need to market like this Lazy Lions." And one of the things that he had, we had a conversation after the show. He was like, man, that was so much fun. He's like, I got to share what I care about. Right. And he, I think, felt like he had only kind of fallen behind the Lazy Lions brand. So I'm curious, like, what are your thoughts on, those that are like, cause I think right now we hold NFT founders at too high of a regard in a weird way. Like, we're like,
it depends, right? It's a fine balance. Like,
it
you
is.
don't want to overshadow or
Yep.
supersede your brand in a way or your community.
Right.
Because once again, that could be like ego driven, narcissistic, etc. Like, look at Adam Newman with WeWork, right?
Yep.
That's a perfect example. At the same time, that leadership or charm, quote unquote, problematic charm is what led it also to being popular, and him raising a shit ton of money
Again,
which is
A16Z
ridiculous.
gave him more money because
I know.
like,
Let's not even go
geez
there.
Louise.
So I think for founders, it's really about finding the balance in the end, including in Web3 and NFTs. Like, community members and those even curious want to know who you are. That's a big
Right.
part of why they'll support the project. Like Sarah from Women in Weapons is a perfect example of this. Like, people love the project, but also people love it because they know her. And she's also starting to share her own content
Yep.
as a female leader in this space. And so we talked about this actually on a phone call the other week. And she said, she realized how important that was too. We look at Gary Vee. Gary Vee is like the prime example of
Yep.
that. Sometimes to an
Yeah,
extreme.
he's like,
right?
like he's kind of like the Apple too in the tech. Like, he's the exception in a lot of ways, right? Where
Exactly. That's like you don't want to be distracting your business and your vision by you. At the same time, how do you add you to your vision?
Yep.
So once again, it's a fine dance. Like, how do you maintain your own platform? It needs to come naturally and be authentic to you. Like,
Yep.
I think if this is tiring you out, if it doesn't feel good, then don't maybe waste your time. But if it's maybe something that you get to go outside your comfort zone with and grow into, I think you can reap a lot of benefits and see lots of rewards. Yeah, look at Zeneca. I think Zeneca is a perfect example of that balance between building a company and then really showing who he is as a founder behind that. And you saying like, well, I already loved Zen Academy, but I love it even more now that I know Zeneca, or I've found this guy Zeneca and wow, I think he's so cool that I will support Zen Academy. So it works
Right.
hand in hand.
Yeah, I think that, and it's funny, I have a Budweiser sent me this whole like Bud Light Pittsburgh Steeler Super Bowl thing or football thing to promote, and I mentioned, I was like, you know what, I'm gonna tag Gary in it. I'm gonna do like because Steelers play the Jets this weekend, and the amount of messages I got, I was like, why would Gary care? And I was like, oh, just FYI, he happens to be the CEO of Vayner Media who represents Budweiser in this conversation, right? But there was like,
and also he's like a big fan of the Jets.
Right. And like kind of likes the Jets, right? And there was a lot of people, what I found like Web3 that don't even know the Gary V of Vayner, right? Like it's almost like, wait, he's the V Friends guy and he's the Gary V brand, but there's some of those exceptions. The other part that I feel like some people will kind of have to find the balance. And I think you and I we've kind of rolled the roller coaster in many different ways, right? Where there is a time where in certain parts of our lives, I feel like we can give people too much access to ourselves, which then really can weigh on the mental health. But then there's also other parts where you're like, F it, I'm just going to show up as my authentic self. And I feel, I sent a message to Justine the other day because she had posted some vacation photos that she was out having a good time. And I just messaged her and been like, I don't know her and like know her, but for me, like I've been a fan for so long of what she's created, and it seldom do I get to see like the side of her it's like relaxing and personal. And I like that was my message, was like, I'm just happy to see that you relax and are personal. And I'll say, Shira, it's the same. Like when I saw you at Burning Man and like kind of like the idea of like you letting your hair down and having that escape, we do Alpha Mondays together, and so I knew you were there. But like like that access, I think, when you're in the right place can make sense. How are you looking at that on like, letting like all of your flags shine and say, hey, this is me versus like, I'm going to hold some of that back. Cause I think that's another one of those balances that I think a lot of people struggle with.
Oh my God. Yeah. I mean, I didn't even get any hate from anyone. My parents were not happy about some of those Burning Man photos. I heard that for a while. Anyway, let's just say I didn't win the Daughter of the Year after.
But your parents were a little upset, but your community, right? There was no hate from that side.
And listen, I'm almost, this is real. I'm almost 40. I am like an adult, a semi-adult, but I think it's important to show that you're a human, right? Because, and there is that balance. Like, I think haters will hate, trolls will be trolls.
Yep.
I think when you are positioning yourself too much as a brand, people, whether it be consciously or subconsciously, say, is this a real person? Like, who are they actually in real life? Or is that who they are? And then when you do the other extreme where you're just like letting it all hang out, there's a bit of a feeling like, this doesn't feel professional. Do I actually want to work with this person? So how do you use these platforms more as a way of expressing yourself and your truth? That's how I look at it. Like, I feel like this is who I am. So how do I just really lean into that? Because, YOLO. And guess what? People will see it and who want to connect with that and feel empowered by that. Hopefully it's like leading by example. They see that and they say, maybe I should be doing something not like this, but maybe there's something that I've wanted to do that I haven't done.
Yep.
Or like, maybe I am kind of too focused on my to-do lists and my work and I haven't let myself go, or maybe I haven't really thought about my mental health. Right. So like, for me, these are things like, it's almost like a stream of consciousness. Like, this is where it could go a bit hippy dippy download, where I'm saying like, this is how I feel. Could this, like, does this represent me? Yes. Could this support someone else, or just be just fun to share? Okay. Like, we each have kind of our filters we put things through. And then there's a lot of times I'll write something on Twitter and put it in drafts. Like, is this coming from a place of reactivity? Am I angry? Am I frustrated?
I
Maybe
think
it's not the best
we
thing
send
to
each other
share.
sometimes our drafts are text to each other. That's like we want to put this out, but we also know it's a subtweet of like bitterness and
Yeah.
that's it's like a balance of that world of it as well.
Totally. So it's like, how are you doing something in a non-reactive way? And also being authentic to who you are. And
Yep.
I think it's just constantly asking yourself that question, like the why.
Yep.
Why am I putting this out there? What does it represent to me? What could it represent to other people?
And
Right.
I
And
think,
like,
I think
that's the
weirdly the
exercise.
Web3 world is actually a little bit more confusing in this because like I did an episode on the podcast and this is like a couple months back or maybe a month back. And I was just talking about like, it's no wonder some brands don't want to work with some people because every Twitter space, they just talk about, hey, I'm taking bong rips and, literally there's like, oh, I didn't have any thought to that. I threw the project up and now I'm doing it. And I was kind of like, hey, we got to be strategic. And then I literally watch the founders of Yuga, Bored Ape, on the Full Send podcast, and they're like, "Yeah, I was tripping that day," and they like they went, and I'm like, "Wait, their company
Well,
is
listen, but Brian, that's like there is some sort of privilege around that,
yep,
right? Already having a gazillion-dollar project, now being able to show up being like, yeah, I'm hungover, I'm, stoned. Like that is a bit of a privilege. And I think there's certain people, specifically women, people of color, possibly those like in the LGBTQ community, that feel like, no, when I am putting myself out there, I need to be on my best
yep."
behavior
And
because
that's why I think it's confusing
people
because
are judged in different ways.
you see someone like them that's doing that, and you're like, oh, like it almost gives permission, especially that like that crypto bro crowd to kind of
Yeah.
lean into that, right? And you're like, no, hold on a second, like let's think like long term, right? Let's also think like how we're building what we're building, and I think that actually goes into also like what you want to like. You guys, they're not worried about future partnerships that like don't want to work with them at this point, right? Like that's like they're like, screw you. I'm at this point
Yeah.
where the rest of us are kind of like at that like, hey, as we're continuing to build, it's not that we have to be a chameleon to everyone, but we also have to realize that there's a risk and reward for all of those, kind of scenarios. So I'm curious from your standpoint, if we look at Web3 brands, Web3 projects, and those that want to hire either a content creator, advisor, strategist, host, how do you think like right now? I mean, because you and I talk about this kind of offline a lot, but like we have a lot of hope for this space and that it won't fall into the Web 2 days of kind of taking everything for free. Come speak for free, you get paid in exposure. But a lot of that is bleeding into Web 3 as well. What is your take on kind of the landscape of how we're there, like that world's valued in this Web 3 world?
Yeah. I mean, it's a balance too because we're building quote unquote, authentic communities. So, do think there's a vibe check that happens. People want to know that you care, you're not just in it for the money. Definitely. I think once that is established, there needs to be an understanding of depending on where you're coming from, like that people have rates, people are paid for their time and their expertise. And you should go into it probably expecting that, just like you would expect a developer or an engineer to have a budget. Maybe they wouldn't charge you as much, like if you're a new project or a startup, maybe then they would take some equity. But like we need to be open to having these conversations and not judge or make people feel bad. And maybe this is me projecting myself. Like I sometimes feel bad when someone approaches me and then they're like, well, we have no budget. And like, it's almost like I feel like there's a sense of like, well, you should want to do it if you really care about the community. Or
I
like,
feel that
oh, you
every
now think
damn
you're all big
time.
time. And I'm like, no, like this is how like the reason why I ended up almost becoming bankrupt and having no money at like 36 to even pay for my rent is because of that perspective,
Right.
because I wasn't valuing myself and my time. So I'm really working to shift that. And it's a constant balancing act. I hate to continue using that word, but it's
No,
so
but
true. Yeah.
and, it's also weird too because like you're never going to ask an accountant like, hey, do this for
Or a
free, right? Like,
lawyer,
yeah,
right? Like
lawyer, yeah, zero chance, right? And like even in this space, I will say like we've been pushing towards don't do that for artists either, right? Like which we know was a problem. But I mean, there's a project that I don't think they listen to the podcast, but they approached me without them knowing like I knew like kind of some of the setup because pretty much everyone talks and shares, at least
Yeah.
hopefully does. And like they had paid this artist to do part of the collection. I mean, 6 figures up front. Right. And when they came to me for this positioning of the thing, it was positioned as if they have no money and that there's like this small percentage on the back end, which I know there's like lots of those pieces. And I'm like, hold on, like, if you want me to do all of this long before the mint, like, let's change this narrative. And they had no idea at the time that I knew. And just to be clear, the artist wasn't like the artist for the NFT collection. It was an artist they were paying like to help build like the brand out itself. And so like, I still feel like that is a weird, space. And, I don't know what your take is like the word influencer, but I like the word influencer in a weird way because it's the difference of when I got paid versus when I didn't get paid for 7 freaking years. Like someone be like,
true. No, you know what? When you start, it's like because of what we think about that word,
Yep.
it does connect to a payment. And I would say creator does too. But if you're, and this is the issue sometimes, if you have a company and we fall into this for speaking and events, a lot of times like you're just marketing your company or you're someone that's not been on air. And then now you're finding that you're getting opportunities to host and be on air. And this is like, oh, I've always dreamed of doing that. And you'll do it for free. So it kind of undermines our work because we actually paid for it. So for Twitter Spaces, there might be people that will co-host or just do it because it's fun for them because, they have another job, they're a marketing person or they're like some sort of other, I don't know, job position. And so this is fun for them and it's fun for us. The difference is we actually get paid for it. So how do you find that balance? And what I would just love, if anyone's listening, I think I would love the conversation to go as follows. We're interested in working with you. This is what we're thinking. How much you typically charge for this, or what's your rate, or what's the model you typically use? And then kind of then go back and say, okay, well, either we could do this or we can't do this, but this is what we're thinking we can do. Or this is the max we could figure out, and totally get if that doesn't make sense for you. And let the creator choose, let the quote unquote influencer choose.
Which technically isn't that the most ridiculous component, right? Like that they want this person because they've built trust with their audience and they know how to formulate this. Yet oftentimes they're then going to dictate the terms and how you're going to do that, even though that's like the opposite of what they want to, hire for. And I think like in Web 2, I mean, I think for most of us, we were like kind of like adapting to what they wanted. And I feel like in Web 3, we have to do the other way around. Like, oh, what does success look like for you working with me?
It's
and
both.
I'll tell you, right? Yeah, it is. It's definitely a meet in the middle type scenario.
Like, I actually do love it. Makes it easier for there to be a foundation to say, okay, this is ideally what we want. And then for me to tweak it based on what makes sense for me. Sometimes starting with a blank slate, while that's exciting, it could also be overwhelming because then you're like, I don't know. Like, I'd rather you come in with your minimums or what you see, and then I'll make tweaks. And I was going to say my biggest pet peeve is when someone approaches you and like they say, okay, well, what do you want? And then you say what you want. And then they're like, oh, we're definitely not on the same page. So it seems like this is not going to work. And I'm like, whoa. You just like made me shoot in the dark, negotiate against myself. And I think that if someone wants to be involved with what you're doing, they'll let you know off the bat, maybe. And then that's when the negotiation comes in. If they don't like what you're doing or your project or your company, they will tell you. But to then, I find that just so not in good faith to quote unquote negotiation, to just choose out for someone once they establish their worth. Like sometimes there's a lot of times there's flexibility in that, but there's the feeling that I think as a creator, or someone entering a business relationship, that I want you to acknowledge, and at least acknowledge that. Say, I see that, and that's what you deserve. We might not be able to do that though. Right. Versus just act like, oh yeah, we're not on the same page. Like, I don't know, that just, it's not nice.
Yeah. And it's, and I think there's something to be said about like, the whole idea of like who speaks first or who puts the number out first. Right. And there's a lot of that is like positioning, right? I got 2 emails in the last 2 days, and both of them were people that had been building a relationship. And I was no dummy to know, like, I knew there was an ask coming. We know, like, we've been in this game long enough. But then the ask came from like that blank slate. Hey, I need you to shoot. And like I jokingly said, to Drew on my team, I was like, I could shoot for 100 grand and they'd be like, you're out of their mind. I could shoot for 20 grand and they were thinking 100 grand. That's how like I was confused as hell of what they were, looking
and then
for.
and then
And
guess
like,
what? Then you
yep,
find out maybe that someone else got more, this or that. So like, yeah, our biggest advice is be clear about your needs and what you're willing to do, and then hear the other person out and find maybe a middle ground. Have a conversation. Is it that hard?
I know. I feel like some people still feel like that way. And the other piece I wanted to, and then we'll move on to the next piece of the kind of where I wanted to take it. But the other part, from I mentioned, like, I think founders are overvalued. And let me qualify that in the sense that people are asking for, like, hey, I need strategic advice on where the market's at, what the pulse is of other project, what the collector wants, and they were like, oh, I want to go find this founder that launched a project. But there are many founders, many of them will openly admit they've not bought a project or cared about any other project for 9 months because they've been building their own.
Yeah.
And yet, for whatever reason, they're valued at like a higher level. And it's such like a
Oh,
weird, like, I remember seeing this where someone was hired over me as a social media strategist, influencer strategist, and they were like, well, Brian, have you seen that person's Instagram following and what they do every day on Instagram? And I was like, I have, and they're badass. But if you wanted just how to grow my Instagram, like what they built, they would beat me every time. But I can guarantee you cross-platform and my awareness as like third party. And I think that's a spot where, and it was a New Yorker article that said, like, the people that aren't valued right now from and they were referring in podcasting, they were like, people that have a point of view that can be a strategist that also have a trusted audience are
yeah.
often the people that we want to take advantage. Like, let me get on your podcast. Oh, I've been building this trusted audience with a podcast. If you want to pitch me to come on the podcast, then value my audience in the sense of, like, if it's that important for you that you're going to go pitch me to come on, then there must
Yeah.
be a reason, right? And I'm curious just from your, like, because I love where Web3 is going, but I do feel there's like a little bit of this, like, people, and they don't, I think a lot of it they don't know, right? They don't know that we all talk, right? Like, and how do we, for anyone that's
I
out there
feel
that's
like there needs
lost,
to be an expectation that people are talking. Like, I'll
yeah,
get a DM. Oh, this NFT. Like, I'm reaching out to get you allow list things, to push your audience. And I was like, they're already talking to me, and I was waiting on a deal from them. So like, no, I'm not going to push it out. Like, it's almost like they're getting other people to reach out to you, thinking that maybe that will make a difference. And it's like, if you've already reached out to someone to establish a relationship, either figure it out or say it's not going to happen. But then you can't expect, like, to back channel, to have like another one of your influencers back channel with them because they're friends with them. That's
yep.
just like that's not cool.
It is not, and it's unfortunate it happens, right? And it's also like, I did this with you not too long ago, right? Like, someone literally is on Zoom with me pitching, and they're like, "We got Shira Lazar involved. I know you guys host Alpha Money," and they were literally trying to lock me up. And I literally messaged you and like, "Are you locked in? Are you working?" And I remember your reply back was like, "No, I've done one or two things here or there, but there's nothing like beyond that." And like, for me, that trust there, like, now my guard's up, right? Like, now, like, you're flexing and using someone
You're
else's
flexing.
street cred,
Yeah.
like, and like, especially from a standpoint of, like, if I co-host a show with you every Monday and you don't think I'm going to follow up, right? Like, like that. And I got a message from I would consider, someone that has a massive, I'd say, NFT influence. He sent me a message via Instagram DMs yesterday. We've never had like a conversation, but we've been connected. And he sent me a message and it just simply said, Brian, I got this offer. This is what they're asking me to do. I value your opinion on it. What's your thoughts
Wow.
on it? And I appreciated that from like a view. I gave him my unfiltered, thoughts on it. And it dawned on me in that moment, like, I don't think a lot of, projects and brands in this Web3 space kind of recognize that is something I think we are starting to get better at, because we've all gone to an event and we've like, and especially women and minorities, right? Where you'll find out the person on main stage speaking on day one is a white dude that got paid 25 grand. And they told you they only have 5 grand for day 2 main stage for female minority there,
Yeah.
knowing damn well that spotlight's the same. The audience is the same. And I think that's that's the Web 2 world, and we can't let that bleed into Web 3. And that's a hard, kind of thing to kind of not allow kind of crossover.
Yeah, but it's already happening. And I'd rather someone say like, hey, our keynote did get this. This is considered more of like a secondary slot. Like, just be honest.
I love
but then
that.
don't
Like,
act like you're giving me the
I will bend over backwards if someone at least, admits that, right? But it's the other, like, let me find out later on that you told me you could only cover my hotel, and yet you flew in every other speaker.
Yeah.
Like, WTF, right? And like, I mean, and that's a whole thing as well, right? On the events, right? Because let's face it, we know a lot of people create events because it's a shortcut for relationship building, right? Like, there's a little bit of that, they play into our ego, get us on stage. Now we're friends with them because they created an event. But if I see someone post that they just cleared 6 figures in revenue from that event, that we know that the reason people came is because we put our name with it, and they didn't even cover our hotel or so we lost money going there to help them build that. They made 6 figures.
Totally. I just did like 3 conferences, and like sometimes I get like, this is the thing. Sometimes I get paid a bunch, and sometimes it's like, this is what we can do. And then it just makes sense. And that's how the decision making. I went back and looked at some of my costs, and I was like, I'm basically losing money on this. Like, I'm not really, because you could say with the content, with the business relationships, it's biz dev, it's relationship growing, but like, there is no reason that in real time, someone who's adding value to what you're doing should be losing money. Like, if anything, if you don't have a budget, you could say like, tell me your hard costs. Like, how much is it? Blah, blah, blah. So, because you should not be going out of pocket on these things. But yeah, these are, the problem is when you're doing a conference, and this, it's like, there's so many different things happening at once. And the easiest thing to do is just treat everyone the same in a way. You either say, okay, no one's getting paid, or maybe you get an NFT, like, NFTLA is playing around with a model around, selling certain NFTs or giving NFTs to creators that are speaking so that they could sell them as tickets to other people. Like, there's stuff like that happening. And overall, like, yeah, it can be challenging if you don't have a budget up front, right? Or you're relying on the money you make on the back end. Maybe there is a way to say like, okay, each person that's booked gets whatever percent of that. So, and we're expecting that to be, if we do blah, 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 get to be this. Like, that can be hard. South by Southwest, it's all based on you just showing up. We know this. The hope is you get a brand deal there that pays for all that. And that's the same thing with this, like Basel coming up, or even when I was at NFT NYC, like, I paid for certain things. I happened to end up getting a brand deal there that ended up subsidizing a lot of my costs. That was great. Doesn't always happen. And you're, of course, investing in yourself. Like, a lot of this is investing in you. But at a certain point, if everyone's like really promoting you as part of your thing, and you're doing what you do and lending your expertise and your job to it, that's where it can get a bit complicated.
I think it's a great way to put it, right? And I think, it's also, and I think, the other advice.
We're venting, by the way. We're like, this is like the woes of the creator right now.
And because I think it's an important, because when for me, part of what this is also like, how many years have we put in where, like, I made the mistake of speaking everywhere for free. And then I was like, oh, well, now I'm going to ask for my fee. And people are like, wait, I got you last year for free, and now you're 10K. And
that is like, so not cool, because there needs to be an understanding that like, that was not the relationship and things change. Like, no, I do have an answer for it now, right? So like, anytime I'm doing a gig where they're like asking me to come in and they don't have a fee, they get invoiced for my full amount minus the full amount, and saying, just so you know, I gave you a discount, 100% discount. Oh my God, that is such a good idea.
Because that sets the bar. Like, they know what they got from you. They know what your expectations are. And next year when they come around, they're a lot less. Now, I will say, like, for me, that's like it's also like a balance, because like, it can come across a little bit of like a flex, but I've found when doing that in the right positions, it at least creates the conversation that says, I gave you something here. And I do feel like that people kind of level that up. And so I think we can kind of lean into that in Web3 as well.
Do you know, like, I love that. Some people, when I say, okay, this is my speaking fee, right? They'll say, well, it's only an hour. Like, I don't get it. It's only an hour. We only need you or I had someone that said that needed me all day, but they said, but really on stage, you're only on stage for this amount of time. And I go, but I have to drop everything that day. I'm flying the day before. Like, and then you're promoting that I'm there. There's certain things like you need to take into account that this is just kind of industry standards, just like anything else. And like, why are you devaluing this side of the business versus the another side of the business? We need to change that. If we're saying that we're in a time of the creator, the artist, it needs to be looked at in a different way. And it's not like I need to be Serena Williams to get that, right? There's like,
Yep.
there, just because you're not, Logan Paul or Charlie D'Amelio,
Right.
like you still have an influence and an expertise that matters. And, I know you have to wrap this, but even recently I was at a conference where I also had been there all a while and underpaid. And I said, well, this isn't this year my new rate. They said I could do max this. Well, I found out one of the other people, even though I was the moderator, they were one of the guests, was being paid 11 times what I was paid.
Oh,
And she was just like, Shira, like, you either need to talk to my guy organizing this, like my agent or whatever. And this is why also, by the way, when you wonder, you get weirded out when someone adds someone to the conversation, a manager or an agent. This is why a
yep.
lot of talent have a hard time negotiating for themselves. And they will say yes because they actually like it and they love what they do. And then that's
I'm
when they're
guilty.
they're taking advantage of a bit. And so
Right.
like that's the reason why that story, why talent bring in representation to speak on their behalf. And it's sad even, and I even spoke to that rep after being like, I just heard this, like you need to start repping me and being these conversations for me. And he goes, you know what? It means sometimes saying no before you're going to get a yes. And for me, that just sucks. Right?
I hate that. I hate
That
that. Oh,
sucks.
it's such a, oh my gosh, I hate that so much. Right. Cause like there is an element of like, when does that like, that stop or how does that kind of go forward? And I think that kind of takes us into that the next part too, where, there are people that right now are starting a project. Maybe they got some funding, maybe they, they're bootstrapping, whatever it may be. And they're looking to work with advisors and those that can kind of do both fly, right? Give them context on advice on how to build a project, but also bring them an audience that they might not have. What is like your preferred way of people wanting to approach you or work with you?
Well, I appreciate that. There's a few things. I mean, if you're literally starting from scratch, you yourself and your project, that could be challenging. However, like I always say, maybe you're not going to be right away a guest on my show because you haven't established yourself. Doesn't mean I don't believe in you.
Right.
But guess what? If you put up your hands, I'll bring you on stage. I'll bring you on stage and start showing up to these spaces, getting to know the people. Don't just show up when you need something. Like I've gotten to know people over the past 6 months to a year. So but that by the time they launch something, like I didn't know them. They didn't even have a background that I knew before, but it's been a while of them continuing to show up, be consistent. And then that builds the relationship so that when something happens, well, maybe I won't even be an advisor or something more official. I'm still down to support because I've gotten to know them. Right. So, like, that goes a long way. Like, sometimes when you just show up and you're like, I want to talk to you right away, it could kind of get unnerving. And then that's when I default to like, here's my pricing, here's my this. Like, it's very transactional. If I've seen you in my space over months and you follow me and you retweet me, like, it's not about vanity, but you're engaged.
Yeah.
And then you say, like, I've really loved your stuff. I'm working on something. Can I just like pick your brain? Sometimes I pick your brain, or can I just get to like, I would love to share more about what I'm doing. And then get someone's temperature on that. Sometimes it might be a fit and sometimes it might not be a fit. Doesn't mean I'm not going to support you, but I might not do it in a quote unquote official way.
Right.
On the other side, if you are someone that's established and all that, then we get to have a real conversation, right? I mean, I get to have a real conversation with everyone, but there's less of that biz dev kind of relationship building sometimes that we need to do. We kind of just jump right into the convo. And there are realities to it. It's like being clear about where you're at and what is realistic and reasonable based on your needs. Right? So like I would say at the very least, as an advisory, a lot of times in this space, just like in other corporate spaces, it is a 1% vesting possibly as an advisor, which
Right.
means you need to figure out, is this on the mint or the company overall now? Right? And there's some security stuff that comes in with this as well. And then uh that is at a low level, if that's a monthly call probably, and then light introductions. If you're wanting more than that, where it's like, I want calls weekly, I want lists, like it's very engaged, you're kind of now going into the consulting route, right?
Yep.
And I see that as kind of the future deals where it's a hybrid, where here's like, and I might say, here's my consulting rate, here's typically the advisory. And you might say, I only have this. And then you get creative, right?
Yep.
And then you might say, oh, but we have marketing budget. So maybe we don't have it on the monthly consulting as much as high as you want, but we could hire you maybe for a speaking thing or to host a Twitter spaces or to create a piece of content. So like, that's where it's about getting creative. And I believe like I'm flexible, but it needs to be the right project, the right alignment, and feeling like there's a win-win there for both sides, that it's not just like a take, like, or an equal energy exchange of sorts.
Yeah, I think that, I think that mutually beneficial component, right? And like, and let's face it, like if you're, have no mint date in sight and you need,
Yeah.
8 months worth of work, right? Like you promising me a percentage on something that is not even guaranteed to happen, is another, a difficult piece. But I would just say like, for all those listening, right? I think there's the beauty of Web3 is I think our ability to be creative with the transparency of, blockchain and the way percentages are shared, I think is a win for all of us all around, right? I think it's better for brands that we can kind of open those doors and get creative, right? Like you're going to treat me like a consultant pre-mint. I win 5% of the mint, but you're only going to need me as an advisor after you mint. Give me 1% on secondary. And now I'm more of an advisor, after mint. I think those are things that
you see, even that's an interesting model that I haven't even considered, but just know also that like we're all talking to each other. And
Yep.
I think as creators, if there's creators listening, like we need to be in this together and be connecting and being real with each other, because it creates a healthy ecosystem for all of us, right? Yep. The more we keep to ourselves and hoard, the more that's just going to happen, and it's not going to benefit anyone.
Yep. Yep. And I think we have to own what we're worth, right? I think you and I both preach that a lot, right? I think when I found out, and this was many months ago now, but that someone actually and this was kind of screwed up in the brand perspective, but they shared how much the brand had paid me the year before to the influencer, and the influencer said he offered half. And I was like how we're on a race to zero if everyone's undermining everyone. And
that's the thing is like in the end, also, if you're going to be pitting people against each other, and at the very least, either if you really want someone, let them know, hey, our hands are tied. This person, is there any wiggle room? And then you might say, you know what, I'll do it. But then, yeah, that just sucks. And it also doesn't help build the relationship or the trust for a future deal.
Yeah. Yeah. Because if someone's telling me someone else's rate, I know damn well they're going to share my rate the next time. So I have to be like, kind of screw you over once. That's going to happen too. All right. We're going to pull this together at the, but one of the things I want to kind of end on is that, I think one of the things that you do amazingly is you are, from my view, you are a staple as a great ally and a great advocate for so many different groups. And I think from the outside, there are a lot of people that want to step into that shoes. Like our dear co-host Manushka, who we had on the show. Love her to death, rock star, and I love sharing on Monday nights with both of you guys. And I remember when she was doing the Time, the Time magazine thing in New York, and she talked about how much you went above and beyond and how much you took care of that. And that was a lot of that was a culture relative thing for what she was trying to build, and you stepped into that role. And I think you do that more so than you probably get credit for. And I just want to say that, as a friend and someone that sees that, like it's something that inspires me each time, right? Each time that you're at a parade or each time you're standing up for those, for those that, need a voice, that we believe have a voice, inspires me to do the same. What's your advice for those that are kind of, maybe it's the cis white male that is listening, that's like, I want to be an advocate, I want to be an ally, but I also don't know like where I fit or how I kind of show up. How do you approach that and kind of help them see that light?
Yeah, just start showing up, show up to spaces, right? You don't need to be on blast yourself, right? Or talking, just listening and learning. And I think that will give you the information you need to show up and support. But it's a consistency thing. It's not just showing up when you're needed or during Pride Month or when a crisis is happening. Allyship is 24/7. It's saying that I see you and I hear you and you deserve better. And I'm going to fight for that. And I'll be there with you, because, oppression to any community is oppression everywhere, right? And injustice anywhere is an injustice everywhere, as Martin Luther King Jr. says. So recognizing that anyone's plight is not just their plight, it's all of our plights. If it's happening to one person or one community, it's, you know, that's where empathy and compassion comes in. You know,
Yep.
while you could recognize it's not your lived experience, it's saying that I hurt still too, and I will fight with you and for you. And so it's just shifting into that mentality, just being a good person. But like in terms of action items, yeah, I would say supporting putting your money where your mouth is. You know, if you're in Web3 NFTs, like supporting founders and artists, buying their art, promoting it to your own platform and
Yes.
your friends and following, right? And then showing up in their spaces and supporting them as well. And then if you have a platform, featuring them and what they're doing. So it's like that's at the very least what you can do. And then even if you don't want to do it publicly, like what are you doing behind closed doors, right?
Yep.
So yeah, are you going to spaces to promote? And it doesn't need to be a pride event, but I would say in the meetings that you're in, how are you speaking about these communities? Are you calling folks forth slash out? If you hear something, say something.
Yep.
If you are in a company, you notice there's not a lot of diversity. What are you doing about it? Or are you just saying, well, that's just is what it is? Or like, you know, we just haven't found the talent. Like, how active are you in all of this?
And I think that's such a beautiful way of too. It's like the more active you are, the more kind of doors and welcoming will exist, right? And I haven't shared this on the podcast yet, but I just signed on to be an advisor for the Galactic Gaylords, and
Cool.
shout out to Austin and the team. And I love everything they represent. And as we were having the conversation, I was like, I can't wait. I'm excited to be a part of the team and provide my point of view. And I had a couple people in my network that are like, Brian, I would love to have that opportunity. And I was like, the opportunity was natural because I've made it very apparent, and I show up very loud and proud for for that entire community in every way possible, where it wasn't something that like didn't feel like it was gonna the connection's gonna be there. And I think you do that better than most. And I was even geeking out. We both have our stoics down below, and Gabe is who I interviewed yesterday.
Cool.
And even he, like the way he talked about like within his art and like the way he wants to help others is like he said, I'm going to collaborate with more people that are in these places that don't have a voice, and I'm just going to keep collaborating them, and it's going to be known that's where I'm going to be at. And he's like, and because of that, it's going to be an automatic light, right? It's going to open some doors. And I felt like it was such I mean, the interview was great. Gabe is a rock star. I love what he's representing. But yeah, I just think it's an important conversation. And I think for those that are interested, just give Shira a follow on all the channels. And
Thanks.
you've been in the game for a while, but you also are one that I don't believe has been rewarded or celebrated the way that you probably should have. But I believe Web3, hopefully we can fix that. So
Let's do
Shira
it.
Lazar, thank you.
Let's go. Let's FG.
Let's go. LFG. Yes. LFG, all those GMs, GNs, LFGs, all of that together. But yeah, thanks so much, Shira, for coming on.
Thank you so much. Appreciate you.
And for everybody that's listening, definitely it's a great opportunity to show your care, go out of your way. And for anyone that's questioning, like, are you a creator? The beautiful thing is step in and own it, right? For all those that want to work with creators, own the fact that they have value, that you value them. And I can promise you value someone at the start of that creator relationship, that the benefit will far outweigh any kind of charge that you put out of the front. If you do it the other way, you often get what you're willing to pay for in the end. So until tomorrow, my friends, make it a great day. Cheers.